Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Sisto Says, powered by Design 2147, a New York City expediting and code consulting firm. Today, I have Drew Hartley of Acheson, Doyle Partners Architects. Drew, welcome aboard.
Thanks for having me.
So, as we start every show, the power of people. You and I were at a networking vendor kind of get together, and I saw the sign Acheson and Doyle. I came over and asked about an old friend of mine, Lou Martino, and we started to chat. And next thing you know, we were engaged in the whole world of architecture as usual. It's a common language. So thank you for coming in. And when we were together and chatting, I told you a little bit about the podcast and sent you an invitation, and here you are.
Exactly.
So thank you for coming on.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what you do at Acheson Doyle, and every firm has their thing. I know that we've worked on several projects together, and they all revolved around restoration, and they all had to do with the few that we did together were churches. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about your role there and what you're doing and what your passion is with preservation and probably landmarks as well.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we have a really, pretty broad range of projects in our office. It's always hard to summarize, but if I had to, it would probably be religious, which you mentioned in the first place, historic properties and historic preservation, hospitality, hotels, clubs. We work on a lot of the private clubs in New York City.
Oh, that's cool.
And then we do residential, which we don't publicize a whole lot, but it's actually quite a bit of our work.
And on the residential side, is it more like individual apartments?
Yeah, individual apartments, houses.
Yeah.
Out of New York.
It's a big market for us right now. We're doing a lot of townhouses, and they used to be just in certain pockets. And now it's expanded to, we got one the other day in Sunnyside, we got a couple in Forest Hills, we got we do quite a few in Manhattan, and always down in downtown Brooklyn, Cobble Hill, that Brooklyn Heights, that area. But now that's expanded to Bed-Stuy, that's expanded to Dyker Heights. It's like, the townhouse, the neighborhood has changed where it's just a whole different. It's a different market right now, and it's a booming sector.
Yeah, we have an interesting one that I've been working on for a while. It's right next to Barclay Center in downtown Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. It's in a historic district, so we had to go to landmarks, had to get it approved. So it's a new townhouse in a historic district.
Great,
but the owner decided to use a prefab company, which is just getting their start. So it's
a challenge.
Assembly OSM is the company. They're a bunch of old Forest City Ratner guys who did prefab previously, started this prefab company. And this is kind of one of the first projects in the city. So.
And you're doing one as a landmark.
In a landmark district. So we got it approved in the landmark district, and it's going up. So
that's a great project.
A thread through a lot of our work is like special projects. Like that one was, you never hear of this before, a new ground up building in a historic district.
No doubt.
And the interesting thing on that is that it was directly over the subway that collapsed. So the house collapsed into the subway, and that's why there's a new house there to be built, because there was an old one. I think it was in the 80s or 90s.
That sounds like a fun project.
Collapsed into the cellar. So
you got to deal with TA.
Of course.
To dig it up, make sure you don't touch there, put all the vibration analysis in the tunnel.
Yes.
That's a lot of fun.
Yep, all that stuff.
So a passion of mine is going around the world and seeing all different types of religious buildings. Been to Abu Dhabi, saw the mosque there. Been to, all parts of Italy to see a lot of churches in my day.
Yep.
Went to Spain and Portugal, probably visited 30 or 40. So I love the experience of opening the door, and a lot of times you can't really feel what the church is like until you open those doors, and then there's an explosion of something, and it's always a different experience. So tell us a little bit about, I know we've worked on some churches together here in Manhattan and in Queens through the Archdiocese. So tell us a little bit about, where that where that part of architecture is today, and how it's, it's still so important to maintain a lot of these really beautiful places. And unfortunately, a lot of the parishes are closing, and the churches are also closing with them, which is very sad, because they're iconic pieces of architecture, a lot of them.
Yeah,
And,
there's so many levels to it, but I think one of the big levels in New York City is the scale difference. You have a church on the corner, it brings the scale down on the corner, and it really generates kind of the urban design of New York City. You have pauses in the,
correct.
the up and down is really helpful.
And then, woo!
Exactly. So that's one aspect, but like you said, going inside, these spaces all have their own take on whatever it is,
And they're all unique in their own ways.
whether it's a church or a synagogue or a mosque.
Correct.
We've worked on all of them, and there's a lot of things that are kind of specific to those buildings. Air rights transfers are big now because they're trying
they
to
changed that for the
figure out how to use that property and get the value out of a landmark, or not necessarily a landmark, but a church property.
Right. One of the things that we do a lot of is now that the diocese is doing ground leases,
Yep.
they have a lot of leftover FAR. They have, especially in the Bronx or even in Manhattan, we've done a few where they had like a playground and they have a big lot, and then they take it. We look at the zoning lot. They figure out what they can maximize to a ground lease, and then they know they're not going to be adding to the church. They're not going to be adding to the rectory. They're not going to be adding to the school. Then they take that piece of land, they sliver it out, they get their own tax lot because they're tax exempt. This one won't. And then lo and behold, did you say, oh, wow, that's a great idea. Well, it takes a year and a half and a lot of really good zoning guys, we pride ourselves on being able to do that along with the architect and understanding that, okay, if we subdivide it, you can't put a building here because now we're too close to the lot line and you got windows at the church. And what are we doing with those stained glass windows? And how do we deal with the separation? It gets incredibly, and like you said, maybe your clients are like our clients. Maybe that's why we work together, is that we get all the hard jobs. We don't get the easy ones.
Of course.
So
we recently worked on St. Bart's, which is in the Midtown rezoning. So they transferred their air rights to the JP Morgan building.
Yep.
But
That's a great building, by the way.
yeah,
St. Bart's is a great building.
yeah. So we've been there for years as well. It's a kind of a reoccurring theme of our office. We have a lot of clients that we've been with for years and years and years.
And they're always doing something.
And you just make sure.
Yeah, we've been at the
happy at the end of
Cathedral of St. John's Divine with INEAD probably for has to be 25 years, 30 years. Just we go from one project to another project to a study.
That's the history of churches, right?
Yeah.
How long they take to build.
Yes.
When they first went up, it was always, Empire State Building went up in 18 months, but rebuilding it today wuld, who knows how long it would take.
Couldn't even get through the building department in 18 months.
Yeah, right.
Never mind build it. So tell me a little bit about your personal passion. Like what do you like to do besides, being an architect? But we all have a place, is preservation your favorite thing?
I think there's an aspect to preservation which I appreciate a lot. I love, telling the stories of buildings. And I feel like when we go to landmarks with a project, they're often, unique projects in one way or another. But really digging into the history of a building, why it's important, why it's not important, really informs design. So I like the design aspect too. But going into the history and figuring out why things are the way they are.
And why they did it, how they did it, when they did it.
Yeah.
It tells you a story about a building.
Exactly.
And I think that's what makes the fabric of New York City so great, is that, you can go back and you can look at it, and a lot of the records are really in great shape, and some of them aren't. But sometimes back in the day, there was a lot of old-time architects that would go to the New York Public Library and find ways to find photographs to prove something to landmarks.
Exactly.
I was always intrigued by that. And those architects, they had a passion for it.
Yeah.
It was kind of like they actually enjoyed doing the treasure hunting.
It's a treasure hunt, and then by the end of you have records that say this is for a reason, and I'm following these rules into the future. And it's also about the history of New York City. We're a part of that, And then
Yes.
our moves are documented. Why did you make those moves? And is it legitimate, not legitimate? But having the backup is telling that story
Without a doubt.
is really important. I think architecture in general is about telling stories. Like design is about telling stories.
Yeah,
And developing kind of the narrative
sure.
is critical. We have a project right now, Upper East Side. It's a 60s modern building. Raymond Loewy was the designer. He designed all kinds of stuff. He designed the NASA spacesuits, I think. He designed the Coca-Cola logo. He designed the Coca-Cola bottle. He designed architecture, interiors. He was designing everything at the time, and he designed this modern lobby, which is kind of Miesian, minimalist lobby, 50s, 60s, kind of mid-century modern. So we're doing interventions to the front of the building. We're doing a new elevator cab to match the historic style of this 50s modern. So it's preservation, but it's also about telling that story of why is it important that your lobby is like this?
Right.
You know, who was this person and why were these decisions made?
And you know that, and that's what makes New York City so fascinating.
Yeah.
Because you could do that right there, and then walk around the corner, and you could have, you know, a typical New York City brownstone that's very similar, that looks like a row house.
Yep.
And then you could walk 3 doors down and have something completely different than.
Right.
So you could have 3 different types of architecture within a half a block from each other.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it fun. But that's what makes architecture fun, is
Right.
that you don't know what the next project is and where it's going to come from and what it's going to be.
Yeah.
You know, you're doing a church one day, and we actually met at this conference that had to do with schools.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's kind of our niche. We do a lot of private schools, whether they're, and we also do a lot of public schools. We do a lot of work with the SCA.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us a little bit about, you were there, I was there, and we were looking at the same clients, which were private schools. So tell us a little bit about, the experience and your firm's experience with private schools in New York.
We historically we've done a lot of work with Catholic schools, primary schools, a whole range from all the way up and down. And one of our interests right now is to kind of moving more into the private schools, not just religious schools market, because they're all the same clients. They're the boards that we deal with all across town. We understand the politics of how you make someone happy. We understand. Working with clients for years and years and years, and
when you do
that.
Catholic schools, they have a lot of budget constraints, and so many of them are closed now, and they've leased them to the SCA or to charter schools, so that's a different market.
Yep.
And then you have, the other group, which is the Upper East Side and the Upper West Side and Lower East Side,
who also has a budget, but
Right.
if you convince them this is something to spend money on, they're willing to do it.
Correct. And that was a lot of the theme that we heard when we sat together and we talked to a bunch of people in the facility side, that, budgets are problems because their enrollment is down also. A lot of people left the city. They're living in the countryside. They're sending their kids to private day schools, or they're going to boarding school, and they're not going and they're not spending, $85,000 for second grade on the Upper East Side, but yet they have to have flexibility. They have to have all of these other things that they would normally have, but their budgets aren't there. And what we did come out of there is that there's not many planned big projects for these private schools right now. But I think that is going. Now that we've settled post-COVID, I think they're going to settle in and understand what the needs are of this new education. I just had Ed Stanton from HLW did a show with us about higher education. And the key word that everyone talked about at his round table when he came in for the show is space flexibility.
Yeah.
Because they learned with COVID that if something happens, they need to be able to turn this lecture room into a classroom, and they need to get that classroom into a gym, and they need to get a gym into something else. It's like, wow, they want one space for every possible thing. And that's changed the mindset for them and for architects.
I heard I didn't hear about any, projects that people were looking to, hit the ground running with, but I heard 3 different people came up to us and said, "Do you do space utilization plans?"
Right.
And
Exactly.
it's New York City. We're limited on space no matter how many buildings you have, how many square foot you have. You want to maximize every square foot.
Of course, and that's that's the key to, if I spend X, how much flexibility can I get, and how do I optimize that space for multiple uses? Like Ed was saying, you build a lab, and the average lab gets used 2 hours a day for 5 days. The average classroom for liberal arts gets used from early in the morning to late at night,
Right.
because they have evening classes, they have adult education, they send it out to the community to use those. Where a lab, you're spending all this money, it only gets utilized for a few hours a day if they're lucky.
Right.
So, every school, every space, whether it's lower education or higher education, they all face the same challenges, which is they need flexibility.
Yeah. I also heard a bit of, I don't know if the facilities directors were quite as open about it, but there's a bit of an arms race with these elite private schools that
Oh, that's always been the case.
you have to have the best. You have to have the latest. And if you are
Correct.
not on the cutting edge of what the latest and the best is, you're not competing. So
Yeah, one of the big things is the gyms.
Yep.
We've done a lot of them.
Yep.
And that is because for some reason people are willing to donate money for a gym,
Yep.
whether it's a pool, whether it's a basketball court, whether it's a multi-purpose space.
Public space.
Yeah, there's something about it that I guess the human mind intrigues people to donate money to. But yet, to find a donor to make, a new computer center may be easier today because a lot more people are in technology. And if they want to donate, they want to donate in their own field.
Right.
So, one thing that Ed was saying that's really hurting is the liberal arts side, because everyone's going into technology or into science or into mathematics, but they're not going into the liberal arts world. So their programs are shrinking. They need more space for that, and they got to go to the deans on this side want more space. The deans on the other side don't want to give up their space, and then they have these problems. And I think the same thing is happening in the education world as well, that if they get donations, they're specific to a type of program,
Right.
and then they got to figure out how do they remove something or how do they add something, and that's not easy. As an architect, it's not easy because you have to convince the client it's the right amount. It's going to meet the needs of the donor. It's going to meet the needs of the students. So, as an architect, how do you balance all that?
We have a number of projects in the private club, city club realm, and where we start with every single one of the groups is do a master plan.
Right.
And everyone hears the word and they're like, we don't know what that means. But the priorities of people on the boards of these clubs is they want to show some shiny new thing
Right.
to the rest of the members.
Short term, not long term.
And we need to balance that with, do you need a new boiler? Do you need new plumbing? Do you need this?
It's funny that you bring that up because myself and my partner Dominic, we were members of the Columbus Foundation, and we were on the grounds committee, and we would say, we need to fix the floor because the floor's 150 years old,
Yeah.
and it's all parquet floored, and some of them are coming up, so they need to be re-nailed, and then or they may need to be sections need to be pulled up to see if the subflooring is. That's why they're lifting, is because the subfloor.
Yeah.
And then another person would say, "Yeah, but we don't have enough hot water." And then another person will raise their hand and say, "It's too cold over here." Oh, and upstairs, we have the cigar room, but the women are complaining, or the men are complaining downstairs that it's not ventilated. Next thing you know, we had this huge list.
Yep.
But instead of them coming up and saying, "Okay, let's get everyone's," and I'm not saying this about the foundation, I'm saying in general, even in the other
group
things,
like that.
in any group like that, it's to prioritize
Yeah.
what needs to be done. And in essence, that is the master plan.
Yeah,
Is
exactly.
understanding what the needs are, understanding what you need immediate. If we have a leak and we're getting water damage at the back of the building, well, all those other things are great. But if we don't fix that, we're going to have bigger problems, right? So,
And this thing that we run into is the governance of a lot of those all schools or any of these groups. They're not architects.
right.
They're not expediters. They don't know all the rules. They know they want something shiny to show their friends, and getting them to understand
true.
and appreciate all the things that actually need to happen, not just the ones they want to happen.
Well, we
are
go to
critical.
we go to a lot of schools that are tight, tight in space.
Yep.
And I'll be walking with the gentleman, and it's a couple of days before the CO inspection. I'm going back several years, and I say to the guy, you gotta get some of this stuff out of the hallway. Because I have no place to put it. I'm like, but it can't be be here.
Yeah.
You can find somewhere else. So I get it.
Yeah.
It's and Ed Stan made a valid point from HLW about part of architecture now is impressing the person who's paying the bill to go to the school, not about the person going to the school. Mm-hmm. Meaning the child or the adult who's going to go to college. But as long as the mom or dad or the grandparent or whoever's paying the bill is impressed with what they see, that is really part of attracting the student to that school, because the student may not be able to make that decision, but the parent's going to make the decision, or the grandparent might make it, or they may make their own. But that experience in those first 15 to 20 minutes of walking into that space, that becomes, as he said, a responsibility of me as the architect. That's,
Yeah.
you don't think of it that way, because you think we're always taught in architecture school that we're trying to make the experience for the student. But that's changed today.
I think day one, so we get a lot of different range of engagement from clients, whether it's a board, an individual, whatever it is.
Whatever it is.
Some of them, they think, oh, I know exactly what I want. Those are the worst clients.
Right, because they didn't really think it through.
They don't, well, they might know what they want, but that's not what we do.
Right.
And that's a very small piece of what we do. So,
Right.
And then there's the other end who gives very little input and very little feedback through the process, which is also a challenge. But I think the ones who think they have it all figured out in the beginning are a real challenge, because they're not engaging in the process of design.
Right, which is, it has to organically grow.
Yeah.
Because what you think, it's funny, my wife and I, we raised our children, we have our house up for sale right now. And it's in Stamford, Connecticut, and we put 4 additions on it, and it evolved. Mm-hmm. First we had one child, then we had a second, then we had a third, then we had parents come up from Florida. We made a suite for them, which eventually went through all 3 of my children. My oldest boy had it, and he had his own bath and his own walk-in closet. Then my daughter took it, and now our youngest son took it. And it was a process, right? Now we're looking to downsize, and we have completely different needs,
Right.
completely different thought process. But yet, back then, the best part of it is we had a vision, but we let it grow as we needed it. And I think you're right. If you have a client right off the bat that says, well, this is what I want, and they didn't let the thought process go through, the what ifs, how about this? How about that? Hey, maybe we think we could move the students better around on this floor by doing this. No, I want this here.
Right.
Then you're right. It limits as an architect, it also limits your value.
Yeah, and I think we just end up with a better project if it's back and forth. And if they really talk about what their needs are rather than the solution they think is best.
Right.
Then
Their
we
job
can-
is not to solution. Their
we
job
can
is
have
to
a,
tell us
we
what
can have
they
a
need.
dialogue, and then we can come up with a solution. And there's still dialogue throughout the whole process. So
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. So do you enjoy going to landmarks?
I do. Yeah, we've had a lot of success there,
Good.
and I feel I get a lot of comments that people say it's terrible, it's challenging, they won't let us do what we want to do. It's not the experience that I've had.
No, our experience, in almost 38 years is that the challenge is finding the right preservation team that limits the expectation to the client, because I think that what's important there, again, is organically letting it happen, and when you do that, there seems to be a lot more ability to keep massaging it and giving them what they want, yet still achieving what you want as an architect. So I think that Landmarks gets a bad rap sometimes, that, oh my God, they just want this. Why do I have to have a brown window? Because there's 10 townhouses in a row with brown windows.
Yeah.
But yet if you left New York City and you moved to Bedford, New York, every house is white and every house has black shutters and black doors. That's it. If you live in the Village, if you don't like it, they tell you move somewhere else. Yeah. Well, at least Landmarks here, they'll work with you a little bit. And I'm not knocking Bedford, New York. It's a quaint little town, but
there's rules.
Those are their rules.
Yeah.
And I think that Landmarks has their rules, but I also feel that a lot of really great architects that we work with, similar to yours, they know how to keep that creativity yet abide by the rules. And I think that's really, really important.
And we've had a lot of success with telling the story of a building.
Sure.
Because then you're in a totally different plane than how do we match the color of this window?
Right.
Then you say, what was the historic color of this window? There's a lot of reasons why. And instead of nitpicking over a color of a window, you're talking about a much bigger thing.
Sure.
So,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I also find that big projects at Landmarks somehow get a lot more leeway than small projects, because small projects are kind of prescriptive. There's rules involved. And the other thing is that I feel like people don't think of DOB regulations in the same way they think about Landmarks regulations.
Very true.
They think DOB, that's the code, you have to follow it. You need 2 means of egress, you need a fire stair this
way.
way.
Landmarks is subjective.
If Landmarks has a brown window, they're like, oh, this is terrible. They're making me paint it brown. Where those are both regulations, but they're seen in very different lights.
Drew, you bring a great point. One thing about my podcast that I put together is I am a huge proponent of rules and laws, because I think the DOB has an obligation really for public safety. They're not designers. That's not their role, right? So to me, when people come in or not come in, but when they come to the office or we have a call and why do I got to do that? Because that's the law. Why do I got to put a steel under an air conditioner? I don't understand it. And I take a lot of time out to explain it to some of our clients, because they just don't know. I'm not talking about when we work with Acheson and Doyle, but when we're dealing with someone who owns a store in Brooklyn and they get a violation, and we're not going to get the job, but they called us because they know someone of someone, and they just want to. And he goes, I don't understand that the unit could sit on the roof. I said, until a fireman comes in, the wood burns out, and that unit kills somebody. It's not. There's a reason, there's a law. And if you don't understand the reason, you also should take a few minutes to ask someone about it. But I agree with you that there are laws in the code that are there to protect the people in the building, the people outside the building, to give them a great experience, just all of those things. But when you get to Landmarks, they have a mission statement. And that mission statement is to preserve landmarks and preserve an entire district. But
it's also a law.
Right.
There is a landmarks law that's written. But
right.
Everyone thinks that it's just subjective. And
it's not.
There are some things that are subjective in that process, in design and architecture in general. But there's a lot that's not, too.
And I think that if you go into that building and you purchase that building and you purchase that site, or if you purchase it, you purchase it with that responsibility
Right.
and that integrity. And it's up to you as the owner to have that integrity to preserve it. And yes, if you want to change it, work with your architect, work with your code consultant, work with your landmarks consultant, whoever you. But you have that as part of the responsibility of buying, one Prospect Park West or 15 Prospect Park West or, 36 something place.
Yep.
If you buy that address, you buy that structure, you own it,
Yep.
and you should embrace it. And I think that's where a lot of times we run into problems where, oh, well, why do I got to spend this extra money? Why do I have to do this? Because Landmarks wants to preserve your site and everyone in the district. You're not worried about the value of it, but you don't want to spend an extra, $2,000 to put this type of door up. Come on.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I think there is value there. I think a lot of these things, lean into the history. That there's value in those buildings for a reason.
Absolutely.
So.
And there's a story to be told.
Right.
When you sell that building, the next person who buys it should feel that same way. Same thing for us. We've been here at Diamond Street. This building was built in the 1890s. It's not a landmark, but we kept the look of it, even with a storefront. We kept the rest of it as much as we could to maintain what it looked like 100 years ago. We redid the facade, but we kept it the same. We redid the windows. We went back and we looked at the color of the windows that were here before. We kept the original cornice that's here. It was wrapped in metal. Opened it up, made sure all the wood was good. It's great, So
Right.
all of those things are incredibly important. And part of your job as an architect and part of my job is to educate
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
client.
I think we've had a lot of success at Landmarks, on both sides, and I think Landmarks respects us for that, for coming in with a developer and trying to push and push and push for something a little more than is just your rote approval.
Right, and your perception to them is really important.
Yeah, that we're fair, but we've played both sides. Sometimes
You have to.
you have to, and we have to be seen by everybody as a fair player who's willing to work for our clients on whatever side that happens to be.
We always, people come here. If people come to our firm, if you're looking to get around the law, we're not the firm for you.
Right.
If you're looking to comply with the law and you want us to go fight for you,
Yeah.
100%. Doesn't mean that because one person said it, it means that's it. There's many things that are subjective that you have to understand how the building department interprets it.
Right.
Same thing with landmarks. You think that when you read it, oh, it's simple, it's clear. And then you get there and they interpreted it nothing compared to what you thought you read.
Right.
That happens to us all the time. So part of our job is also to fight for our clients for an interpretation, but it needs to be safe. It needs to be fair. And we always tell our customers sometimes, okay, you don't want to provide this. Our job and your architect's job is you don't want to provide this, then give me something that is on the same level, that achieves what the building department wants, that achieves what the fire department as an alternate solution.
Right.
You can't say, oh, I don't want to give you a 2-hour wall.
Right.
Well, there's no building department in the world that's going to say that.
Right.
So because you don't want to do it doesn't mean that works. Now, you tell me, oh, well, I can't do this. Can we build it out of this with a sprinkler head over it with this kind of intumescent paint?
Right.
We can achieve that same thing, but it's going to look quite different. Well, now that's a whole different ballgame. But you saying I don't want to paint the window gray, well, sorry. That's just not the way this, the way Landmarks works, the way the DOB works.
And I don't know how we got into it, but so many of our projects are like special projects. They don't really fit into a category.
Right.
I've never seen this before. It's interesting solution.
We do a lot of that too.
And they're so much fun because it's not rote. It's being creative.
It's not repetitive.
It's coming up with something new. So, and they're not always flashy projects, but doing something different is fun and interesting. And that's what gets me up every day.
Great. It's been a real pleasure, Drew. I enjoyed talking to you when we met. I've enjoyed having you on the show. So as we wrap it up, I have a dialogue at the end that I use. Comes from a good friend of mine, Andrew Peters from Curry and Brown. He's a cost estimator. And when he first came on the podcast, he was probably one of the very first few episodes. He talked about his responsibility as a cost estimator, that everybody wants him to look backwards and say, well, what did it cost to build that last one? And he goes, look, I need to look forward. By the time you get this off the ground, by the time you do this, my job is to take history and project it forward with what I think is going to happen. And that's a very difficult thing. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. It's not a trick question, but right now, churches, religious civic buildings, cultural buildings, where do you predict our market going forward? Because you're in it, you're bidding a lot of jobs, we bid a lot of jobs. We've seen it on a sad side where a lot of places are closing.
Yeah.
And that especially, a lot of, whether it's in Lutheran, Episcopal, Catholic, a lot of religious have downsized, restructured, use the land value to do other parts of things that they need, like infrastructure on the church or the school. Tell us a little bit about where you see that going.
Currently on the books, we have so many projects of church or synagogue buildings where how can we reuse this building? I think it's adaptive reuse. It's not just religious structures, but retail right now is really falling off a cliff as well. What do we do with those spaces? What makes sense? And
but meanwhile, the rumblings are that retail is on a bounce back. We're hearing a lot of it. We're not seeing it yet.
Yeah.
But we've heard that the traditional retail space is going to change, and they're going to, what we're hearing is a lot less depth, a lot smaller store, more interactive, where people can come and say, "Hey, I want this," and then maybe go to a station, and they could show it to them, and they can order it and be in their house the next day. Versus the big box where everyone would go, and now you go to the big box store and they don't have anything in the store, so people leave. So I think that the size of the space, the experience of the space, some are going to be bigger and grand, and some are going to be a lot smaller and a lot less in depth. So that's kind of what we're hearing. I don't know if it's going to happen or not, but that's kind of what we're hearing.
I mean, the supply and demand curve has to equal out, right? If no one's leasing those spaces or using those churches, eventually their value goes down to a point where it makes sense to be creative, do something new. We've seen churches turned into schools. We've seen churches turned into housing. We've seen parts of churches demolished and other buildings being added onto them.
Correct.
But it's not your cookie cutter development project. They're all very unique, individual.
And all of them have different needs. So I agree to that. I think that, in my opinion, I think that part of that is, regardless of, all kinds of religious buildings are going through that, because same thing, their congregations have gotten smaller. They don't need as much space, but they have different space. Because now they have more nursery or more daycare or more adult daycare, or they have, a soup kitchen going on where it was small and now it's gotten much bigger, and they never thought about that they needed more space. So they take this away and add that. So again, it's always about, adaptive reuse.
Yeah. We did a project we just won Friends of the Upper East Side Preservation Award for. And
nice. Congratulations.
It was a church that hospital bought their church to use the site for expansion of the hospital. And then they bought another church and completely renovated so their church building into the space that they needed. And that space was a preschool. It was a soup kitchen. It was a gymnasium. It was a church, but the building is really, a city unto itself, and all the public programs that they run. So
so that's awesome, and I always feel that type of architecture is fun, because I think it has a lot of our soul in it. That we feel like we're doing something really good for the community. We're doing something good for the people around it, and not just taking a building like that and putting it in a dumpster and carting it away and throwing it in a landfill. So
Right.
I think that's a really good part. And there's always a good feel good, and especially when you do a great job and you get an award for it. That's,
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a mission-based architecture, right? Fit the
Exactly.
program to what's important to the group. so.
Exactly. Well, Drew, it was a pleasure for you to come in and chat with me. I hope the audience enjoyed our chat. It was a pleasure meeting you before. It's a pleasure to see you again.
Yeah.
And looking forward to have you come back another time.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Drew.